Patrick Bet David doesn't usually hold back when he breaks down sports business, and his take on Angel Reese and the whole "we might sit out" conversation sent the internet into overdrive. Not because he shouted the loudest, but because he did something most people avoid. He followed the money step by step, and when you look at the WNBA through that lens, the picture gets a lot more complicated than social media debates suggest. The entire discussion started after Reese floated the idea in a live stream about WNBA players potentially sitting out if conditions and pay don't improve. On the surface, it sounded like a standard player empowerment conversation, something you hear across professional sports. But Bet David zoomed out and asked a very simple question that changed the direction of the entire argument. Sit out from what exactly? Because when you look at the WNBA's financial structure, the league has reportedly been operating at a loss for years, with NBA subsidies helping keep it stable. That detail matters more than people want to admit. A strike or a sit-out only carries weight when the league itself is financially dependent on constant player-driven revenue. In this case, critics argue the WNBA was still building toward that level of independence, not quite there yet in terms of pure profitability. That's where the tension starts. Reese's comments were framed by supporters as confidence and advocacy, but critics like Bet David interpreted them through a business reality. If the league is still relying on external support, then the leverage dynamic isn't balanced the way it is in other major sports. At the same time, Reese has been very open about her earnings and financial expectations. Coming out of college basketball, where NIL deals reportedly brought her significantly higher income than her rookie WNBA contract, she's part of a new generation of athletes experiencing a financial adjustment when entering the league. Her rookie scale contract is only a fraction of what she was making in college through endorsements, and she said publicly that her WNBA salary doesn't cover her lifestyle or bills. That gap between college money and professional rookie contracts is not unique to her, but because of her visibility, it becomes part of the broader conversation, especially when fans compare her situation to other rising stars in the league like Caitlin Clark, Paige Buchers, and Aaliyah Boston, whose marketability and on-court production have already reshaped how people talk about value in women's basketball. But what really pushed this discussion into viral territory wasn't just money talk. It was perception, and perception in sports is everything. Reese walked into the league with a massive brand already built. Fashion deals, sponsorships, social media influence, magazine features, and a national championship pedigree from college made her one of the most recognizable names in women's basketball before she even played a WNBA minute. Supporters see that as proof of star power. Critics argue that star power still has to translate into winning basketball and consistent performance at the professional level. That tension is where the debate keeps heating up. During preseason action with Atlanta, the expectations were high. The storyline was set: a new team, a new environment, and a chance for Reese to reset her narrative after leaving Chicago. Social media framed it as a redemption arc waiting to happen. But once the games actually started, reality took over. In her return to Chicago wearing an Atlanta jersey, the spotlight was intense. Fans weren't neutral. Former supporters were mixed at best, and opposing fans were loud. On the court, Chicago's defense, led by Camila Cardoso, made an immediate impact. One of the most replayed moments from that matchup was Cardoso meeting Reese at the rim and rejecting a shot cleanly in traffic, a play that spread across highlight pages within minutes. It wasn't just one block either. Across multiple possessions, Reese struggled with finishing around the rim, an area of her game that has been heavily discussed since college. Critics point to mechanics that rely heavily on releasing shots low rather than going strong through contact, which becomes a problem when facing elite rim protectors at the professional level. Online reaction was immediate and, at times, brutal. Some fans pointed out missed layups that they consider routine at this level. Others pushed back, arguing that early season or preseason performances shouldn't define a player's trajectory. But in the age of constant clips and instant replay culture, every possession becomes a talking point. Then came Atlanta's home debut atmosphere, or lack of one, depending on who you ask. Gateway Center Arena in College Park is a relatively small venue compared to NBA standards, seating around 3,000 fans. On paper, that should be an easy sellout, especially for a player with Reese's profile. But reports and game visuals showed large sections of empty seats during the Mystics matchup, which added another layer to the ongoing conversation about her draw as a star. This is where Caitlin Clark inevitably enters the discussion, because the comparison has become unavoidable in modern WNBA media coverage. Clark's impact on attendance and viewership has been widely reported. Indiana Fever games have sold out both at home and on the road, with opposing fan bases often turning out specifically to watch her play. Television ratings have also surged significantly during her games, with ESPN broadcasts drawing record numbers compared to previous seasons. Supporters argue that Clark's value is not just individual performance, but overall league growth. Critics of that narrative push back and say it oversimplifies a complex league-wide improvement. But what even those critics don't dispute is that her presence has significantly changed visibility for the WNBA on a national level. That contrast is what fuels most of the online arguments surrounding Reese. Because while Clark's impact is measured in ratings, attendance, and league-wide attention, Reese's impact is often discussed more in terms of branding, personality, and cultural influence. And those two things don't always translate the same way in business conversations about revenue. Patrick Bet-David leaned heavily into that distinction. His argument wasn't centered on personal attacks, but on measurable outputs. Attendance numbers, broadcast ratings, and league revenue projections. His main point was simple. In professional sports, leverage comes from what you generate. If a player increases viewership and ticket sales, that player indirectly strengthens everyone's negotiating position. From that perspective, Clark becomes a central figure in the economic argument around the WNBA's recent growth. Her rookie season coincided with a major jump in ratings, increased attendance, and a historic media rights deal reportedly worth billions over multiple years. Networks and sponsors, according to multiple reports, tied part of that valuation directly to the surge in interest around her games. That's where salary conversations come in. Under the newer collective bargaining structure, WNBA salaries have increased across the board. Players like Aaliyah Boston, Kelsey Mitchell, and others have benefited from the revised framework. Even role players saw improvements compared to previous years. But the biggest leap in financial terms is still reserved for players whose impact translates into measurable league growth. Clark's salary trajectory reflects that shift, with her moving from a rookie-scale contract into higher earning potential through performance-based and supermax considerations. That kind of financial progression is directly tied to league economics, not just popularity contests. Reese, meanwhile, sits in a very different category financially. Her earnings are still significant compared to average income levels, but relative to top-tier WNBA earners and rising stars, the gap is noticeable. And that gap becomes part of the online debate, whether fair or not. What complicates everything further is performance inconsistency during preseason. In multiple games, including matchups against Washington and Chicago, Reese faced tough defensive coverage from younger frontcourt players like Kiki Iriafen and experienced defenders like Cardoso. Several blocks and missed interior finishes became viral clips, not because they were unusual in isolation, but because they fit into an ongoing narrative already circulating online. That's the part of modern sports media that cannot be ignored. Performance is no longer evaluated in isolation. It is immediately placed into context, edited into clips, and fed into ongoing debates about value, potential, and expectation. Even Chicago's roster changes after the trade added more fuel to the conversation. The Sky brought in experienced players like Skylar Diggins-Smith, defensive talent like Jonai Carrington, and veteran presence in Azura Stevens. Early returns suggested a more balanced system, with better spacing and ball movement compared to previous seasons. Supporters of the roster change argue that Chicago became more flexible and defensively stable after reshuffling pieces. Critics of that perspective argue it's too early to judge. But what stands out most is that multiple high-level players chose to join Chicago after the roster shift, which inevitably feeds into discussions about team culture and direction. On the flip side, Indiana continued building around Caitlin Clark, Aaliyah Boston, and Kelsey Mitchell. Their chemistry, especially in pick-and-roll actions and offensive spacing, has been widely praised by analysts. Clark's ability to draw defensive attention opens opportunities for teammates, which is part of why Indiana's offensive system has looked so efficient in stretches. That difference in team construction becomes the backdrop for the broader debate. One side focused on growth through structure and efficiency, the other still searching for rhythm, identity, and consistency in execution. By the end of the preseason conversation, what remains clear is that Angel Reese is at the center of one of the most heavily discussed storylines in the WNBA right now. Not just because of her personality or branding, but because every performance, interview, and highlight is being weighed against expectations that are constantly shifting. Some fans believe she is being unfairly criticized and still developing in a demanding league. Others argue that the gap between perception and performance is becoming too wide to ignore. And in the middle of it all is a league that is evolving faster than ever, with new stars, new economics, and new pressure attached to every game. What happens next will depend less on social media debates and more on what happens on the court when the games actually count. Because preseason narratives fade quickly, but regular season production is what ultimately defines careers in professional basketball. And right now, everyone is watching closely to see how this next chapter unfolds.